Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. You're listening to the Queen of Show Talk, Angela Butler. Today is Attorney Gene Nicholson. He's an attorney from South Florida, Jacksonville, Florida. Am I correct, sir?
Yes, ma'am, Ms. Butler. Jacksonville, Florida, and North Florida.
In North Florida. Yes. He's an attorney who can practice in Georgia. Explain that to my listeners, please.
Yes, ma'am. So I'm a criminal defense lawyer in Jacksonville, Florida. As a lawyer in Jacksonville and as a sworn lawyer, I have the opportunity to practice all forms of law in Florida, and then in certain situations I do present in the state of Georgia, and with permission of the court, I'm able to practice in individual cases in the state of Georgia, including in the Brunswick area.
Brunswick, Georgia area. Now, speaking of Brunswick, Georgia, there was Ahumad Arbery that was murdered by Mr. Travis Michaels and his father, Mr. Travis Michaels, and I can't think of his name. I apologize.
That's okay. That's okay. Gregory McMichael were the two McMichaels, and then Roddy Bryan was the third defendant in that case.
Yes, sir, the third defendant. Now, they both received 50 years, life in prison plus 20 years. Both the son and father did.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct. So yesterday the judge sentenced both McMichaels to life in prison without the possibility of parole, which means that in the state of Georgia they could have received a chance of parole after 30 years. Neither one of those individuals received that chance, so they actually received a life sentence plus 20 years. The judge ran one of the other counts consecutive. So in essence, while they both are sitting under a life sentence with no possibility of parole, the judge still punished them to another 20 years. So there is no chance, subject unless appealed and won, that either one of them will ever get out of prison in the state of Georgia.
Now, Mr. Brody received the life sentence with possibility of parole.
That's exactly right. So Mr. Bryan, who was the one who was driving the vehicle and made the videotape, the court made a determination that there was some remorse as well as cooperation with the prosecution, with the police. And so for those reasons, the court was required to sentence him to life in prison. However, he is eligible for parole at 30 years, and the judge did sentence him to jail time on the other counts, but he suspended that sentence, so therefore he doesn't have to serve that time. So Mr. Bryant could get out of jail after serving a 30-year sentence.
Oh, okay. All right. So Ahumad Arbery, as we know, was 25 years old, and he's dead. Basically, people are asking me to ask you what happened in Satilla Shores, Georgia. Attorney Nicholas, they're asking me to ask you, is there a death penalty in Georgia? And you've answered this on the last show, but somehow they missed that.
That's okay. So Georgia does have a death penalty. In order to seek death in any criminal case, including the state of Georgia, you have to be charged not only with the crime, but also with the death penalty. Every state has very specific crimes that call for the death penalty. And in this situation, the state attorney's office, who prosecuted these three, determined that it did not rise to the level of a death penalty case in the state of Georgia. And so state attorneys all throughout the country have the discretion of whether or not to prosecute for life imprisonment or for the death penalty. and the prosecutor made the determination that based upon Georgia statutes, what these three men did not rise to the level of a potential death penalty case. Death penalty cases, we have to remember, and for your listeners to understand, are sometimes very difficult or more difficult to prove than a non-death penalty case. Jurors have to make decisions in death penalty cases of punishment, not just guilty or not guilty, but the jurors also have to be involved in whether or not to sentence somebody to death. It's really one of the very few crimes in the country in which a juror has control over a punishment. Any other type of case, the judge makes the punishment. But in death penalty cases, the jury has to vote on whether or not death is appropriate. So no matter what the crime is and who's involved and what the allegations are, state attorneys usually will not pursue the death penalty unless they are ready to let a jury be involved and make that decision. It is one thing to ask a civilian, somebody not involved in the process, to be a juror. It is one thing to ask a juror to sit in judgment of another person. It is another thing to ask a juror to decide life or death for another human being. And that is a decision that is not often used, and different states use it differently. And in this situation, they determined that this was not the type of case to ask a jury not only to find them guilty, but also to consider death. So they pursued a life imprisonment without the possibility of parole punishment in this case.
Okay. All right. So this case was held in Brunswick, Georgia, but it happened in Satilla Shores, Georgia.
So, Satilla Shores is a neighborhood. It's an area of that Brunswick community. Brunswick was the appropriate place to hold this. They brought in prosecutors from a different jurisdiction after the prosecutor who had originally had this case recused herself because of her relationship with the McMichaels.
Okay, she was charged. Do you know if there's been an outcome to that?
There has not been an outcome. She is currently under indictment for the way that she handled the case, and we expect that we will see closer to this year her prosecution and potentially a trial in her case. Whether or not the conviction of the Michaels changes that will be very interesting to watch. But for now, she's under indictment, and she will have a trial coming up later this year for the charges that have been levied against her. She was indicted for violating her oath as a public officer and obstructing a police officer, and we should expect a trial on that case this year.
And that's former District Attorney Jackie Johnson?
Yes, that's former District Attorney Jackie Johnson. She initially had this case, and she took a phone call immediately after the incident happened from Travis McMichael from Greg McMichael, and she, according to the indictment, directed the police to not arrest either one of them, and she is being blamed for the delay in either one of them being arrested and then subsequently prosecuted. So she did recuse herself before she was ever arrested because of the relationship, but she's being charged with making decisions on this case, knowing the McMichaels before she ever recused herself, and she has subsequently lost an election to continue to be the district attorney of that jurisdiction. So since the loss of her election, she no longer prosecutes criminal cases.
Okay, so there was something I mentioned in the last interview, Attorney Gene Nichols, about Mr. Greg McMichael, that he worked for, in some capacity, with former District Attorney Jackie Johnson. And I had
Yes,
asked
ma'am.
you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I was going to say that, yes, that's where the relationship came in, is that Greg McMichael at some point in time had worked in her office, and the charge is that she showed favoritism to him. Matter of fact, specifically, I believe the indictment says that she showed favoritism and affection to Greg McMichael during the investigation.
Okay. So the cases that Mr. Greg McMichael may have handled that did participate in, do you think they can come under review?
So a lot will depend upon what Greg McMichael would have done, and whether or not we know that he was not an arresting law enforcement officer. So we know that his role in cases was probably fairly small. Would I expect good lawyers to look at their clients' old cases for that he was involved? Yes. Not necessarily because he was convicted of this charge, but more because it is clear from everything that happened in this trial, and it is clear from what the judge even had to say, and it is clear from the indictment that the federal courts have brought against Mr. McMichael, that Mr. McMichael is a racist, and that he made decisions in this case based upon the color of Ahumad Arbery's skin. And for that reason, if there are defendants who believe that the state attorney's office handled their case differently because of race, and it's determined that Mr. McMichael may have had something to do with it, then yes, that I would expect lawyers to look into their old cases. But that being said, we have to remember that just because Mr. McMichael may have made copies or Mr. McMichael may have been at a scene, typically speaking, for cases to get overturned because we find out at a later date somebody was a bad apple, usually that has to be a police officer or somebody who was in charge, somebody who gave evidence, somebody who testified. To give you an example, if you find out that the rookie police officer who never showed up at the scene and only maybe who transported a defendant from one place to another is a bad apple, that doesn't mean that the whole case gets thrown out. If, however, you've got a police officer who planted evidence or ignored evidence or lied because they are a bad apple, then that's when cases get overturned. So while I expect lawyers to look at cases that Mr. McMichael was involved with, it appears Mr. McMichael was not very involved in cases that could have an impact on the guilt or innocence of the defendant. And if it doesn't impact the guilt or innocence of the defendant, then it probably will not change the outcome.
Okay. All right. So that's what I wanted to ask you about. Now, the federal case that'll happen, I believe, in about 2 weeks, approximately 2 weeks.
Yes, ma'am. They are all three are under indictment for federal hate crimes. And this is where Georgia did not have a statute on the books at the time to prosecute individuals for hate crimes, and a hate crime being exactly what you can think is. It is committing a crime against somebody and there being some form of racial discriminatory reason, either for race or creed or color or religion. But the federal crimes do allow for a prosecution that involve race reasons. And so all three are under indictment for a hate crime. And so that's they are most likely going to face a trial here in a couple of weeks.
Okay. All right. So they're likely to face a federal hate crime.
yes,
indictment.
and so, right. They've already been indicted, so now they're going to face a trial. And what we need to be watching for, what your listeners need to be watching for, is whether or not there are any deals that are struck between the federal government and the defendants now that they have already been convicted of their crimes in state court. Because when it comes to the McMichaels, since both of them are facing life without the possibility of parole, there's no real reason for the McMichaels to just strike a deal, because appeals are not successful in the state court case. They're spending the rest of their lives in prison anyway. What you want to watch for is whether or not Mr. Bryant, Roddy Bryant, has a chance to strike a deal in his federal case, because as of now, he has a chance, not a great one, but he has a chance before he dies to see the light of day again. So he's really the only one who has a reason to try and work something out. What we also can't forget is that all three defendants will appeal their decisions of guilt and innocence. And if there's any success on appeal, then none of them want to receive a large federal sentence, because if they receive a large federal sentence, then it won't really matter if they win their appeals. So all three of these gentlemen, and they probably, I take that back, because none of them deserve the title gentleman anymore. All three of these convicted felons deserve a prison sentence, and all three of these convicted felons are now in double trouble, because even if they win an appeal in the state court case, if they get convicted and end up with a substantial prison sentence in the federal case, they'll be spending the rest of their lives in prison. A lot of times when people get charged in state court and federal court, you don't pursue the second one if the first one worked. But that being said, I expect the federal government to pursue these federal charges, and I expect all three of these men to have to go to trial, and they most likely will be convicted and will receive substantial federal prison sentences. So the chances that any of these men ever see the light of day again in a roll of freedom is minimal to none.
Okay, so the prosecutor, she's really good.
Yes, ma'am. She did an excellent job.
And I understand they're saying it's race on the federal level, but she didn't really bring race into it. The defense did. But she didn't bring a whole lot of race into the case, but she won it based on the evidence and the facts. Now, she's good. I can't think of her name, though. She wears glasses. That lady is good.
She's an excellent prosecutor. She did a very good job of proving her case, and she did a very good job of disproving the defendant's suggestions and allegations in attempts to try and persuade this jury that young Mr. Arbery was doing something wrong. Her case, one of the elements of her case was not that this was a racially motivated killing. It will be one of the elements that the federal prosecutor will have to bring up. So you can expect that we will hear a tremendous amount about race in the federal prosecution, but in the state prosecution, it was unnecessary to do because it was not an element of the case.
Okay. Her name is Miss Linda Junakowski. Miss Linda Dunakowski, and she's the lead prosecutor. She's good.
Agreed.
Excuse me. And she didn't bring race into it, but she still won based on the evidence. So I just wanted to point that out. Also, she asked for something, that any movies or any money that came in to the McMichaels, movies or promotions or advertisements or anything like that came into money for them? What did she ask for the judge to do?
Sure. So in most all states, including Georgia, we now have laws on the books that say that individuals who are convicted of crimes, especially of murders and other types of serious crimes, if they receive any pecuniary gain, which means money, if they receive any money because of the crime, then they should not be able to keep it. And to give you an example, for years, we know of back, 40 years ago when Charles Manson was convicted of crimes of murders in the state of California, he received for years monies, offers for interviews, offers for autographs, and other defendants over the years have received monies because people will pay for an interview or will pay to get their autograph or will pay to go see them. And so the states finally got wise and said, we're not going to allow this anymore. You are not going to make money off of killing somebody. We're not going to let you write a book. So the McMichaels, if the McMichaels decided to write a book about what happened to them, what the prosecutor asked for was any monies that are received by the McMichaels for anything that they get money for associated with this should go to the victims. And so what the judge did was the judge agrees, however, he just wants her to put it in a written motion to cite the statute. And once she does that, the judge will add on to the judgment and sentence that pursuant to Georgia law, they are not able to make any money off of the death of Ahumad Arbery. Because you can imagine if they could, they would. If it was decided that, I don't know, if Fox News to interview the McMichaels and the McMichaels agreed that they would give an interview, but it would be, they would get $25,000 for it, Fox News may pay them to get the first interview. Well, that's money that is received by the McMichaels based upon their conviction in the death of Ahumad Arbery. They shouldn't be able to make a dime off of what they did. And that's what the prosecutor asked for. And you will see an order from the judge here over the next couple of weeks granting that motion to make sure that the McMichaels and Mr. Bryan don't make any money off of the convictions that they received.
And Mr. Bryan won't either.
Yeah, he'll do it for all three of them. There's no doubt in my mind that he will make sure that they don't receive any monies. All three of them don't receive any monies for what happened. Now, nobody's going to, I doubt anybody would ever want to pay them to hear what they have to say. But just in case somebody did, or there was a book opportunity or something along those lines, those are monies that should go to the Arbery family, and that's what the prosecutor asked for.
Okay. All right, Ms. Attorney Gene Nichols, thank you for coming on the Queen of Show Talk, Angela Butler. Thank you for agreeing to do the interview.
Ms. Butler, it's always a pleasure to be on your show and help your listeners understand anything that's going on in a legal capacity in the country, and I'm always honored to be a part of your show.
Yes, sir, and if I find any cases in South Florida, I will be looking you up.
I'll be happy to help with anything that you need.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Attorney Gene Nichols. Say the name of your law firm, please.
Yes, ma'am. I am a partner with the law firm of Nichols and Pina in Jacksonville, Florida, and we do all forms of criminal defense and personal injury when people are injured in accidents and wrongful death cases. We handle criminal defense all throughout the state of Florida, and we handle automobile accidents and wrongful death cases all throughout the country.
All right. Thank you for coming on the Cleaner Show Talk with Angela Butler. Attorney Gene Nichols, have a great day and enjoy your new year.
Thanks, Ms. Butler. Thank you, ma'am. You too.
Yes, sir. Thank you.